My name's Chloe Vance. I'm 28. And 11 months ago, while I was carrying my grandmother's casket down a church aisle in Maple Ridge, Ohio, my cousins were 2 hours north, standing on her dock, watching a locksmith drill out her front door. By sunset, they'd posted a photo from that same dock. Wine glasses, golden light, the caption, "Finally home." By sunrise, a sheriff's deputy was standing in that exact spot, telling them to pack their things. 1 hour. I'm not a dramatic person. Ask anyone who knew me 5 years ago. I was the one who sat at the end of the table and didn't say much. My cousins used to call me the ghost. It wasn't even mean, really. It was just true. That person's gone now. And if you've ever had family like mine, the kind that's warm in the good years and goes quiet the second things get hard, then shows back up the moment there's money on the table, you can probably already guess the shape of this story. You don't know the shape of it yet, though. Not really. So let me start where it actually starts. Her name was Eleanor Vance, my mother's mother. The most important person who ever loved me, full stop, no close second. My mom, Linda, Eleanor's middle daughter, died of ovarian cancer when I was 16. My dad checked out before she even passed, if I'm honest, and remarried inside 2 years to a woman who treated his first family like a chapter she'd skipped past in a book she didn't love. By 18, I had exactly one adult in my corner, my grandmother. She lived in Maple Ridge in a little house with a porch that sloped. But the real center of gravity for our family was a lake house on Pine Hollow Lake. My grandfather built it himself back in the 60s with his own hands before he died and before I was born. I never met him. I knew that house anyway. Every step that creaked. The soft board on the dock, third post in, where the wood gave just slightly under bare feet. I learned to swim off that dock. My grandmother taught me her mother's biscuit recipe in that kitchen, never written down because, she said, real recipes live in your hands, not on paper. The summer after my mom died, I went there and I cried into her shoulder for 3 days. She never once told me to be strong. You don't have to be okay right now, she said. You just have to keep breathing. The rest comes later. I think about that more than almost anything else she ever told me. Here's where it gets complicated. Eleanor had 3 kids. My mom, who I lost, Aunt Diane, the oldest, lived 20 minutes from the lake house, visited often, at least when it suited her. And Aunt Carol, who'd moved to Colorado for work and only made it back a couple times a year, but called every single Sunday, no exceptions, for as long as I can remember. Diane had 2 kids. Brittany, 4 years older than me, married with 2 kids of her own by 26. And Tyler, a year older, bounced jobs, lived in an apartment his mother quietly subsidized, and had what I'd call a flexible relationship with the truth, if I were being generous, which I am trying to be less of these days. Even as kids, summers at the lake house, there was a pecking order, and I was never near the top of it. Diane doted on Brittany and Tyler in a way that felt less like love and more like an investment portfolio. My grandmother noticed. She didn't say much in front of them. But once, when I was maybe 14, she pulled me aside and said it plain. Diane keeps score, always has. She looked at me like she was handing me something important. Watch out for people who keep score, Chloe. They'll cash you in eventually. I didn't understand that sentence at 14. I understood it completely at 28, standing in a funeral home parking lot with my phone buzzing in my hand. When I was 23, my grandmother had her first stroke. Not severe, she got most of her mobility back within a few months, but it scared everyone, and for about 3 weeks the family did exactly what you'd hope a family would do. Diane brought casseroles. Brittany posted something tearful on Facebook about Grandma's strength. Tyler came once, took a selfie next to her hospital bed, smiled in it like it was a vacation photo, and didn't come back. I was the one who rearranged my life. I was a marketing coordinator in Columbus then, 2 hours away, and I started driving up every weekend, Friday after work. Groceries, doctor's appointments, the physical therapy exercises she hated doing without someone watching. Drive back Sunday night, exhausted, do it again. 5 years of that. I'm not telling you this so you'll think I'm a good person. I'm telling you because everyone in my family knew I was doing it, and everyone except my grandmother and Aunt Carol just Let it be expected of me. Like because I didn't have a husband or kids yet, my weekends were worth less than theirs. There was a Thanksgiving. I'd just turned 25 when Diane said, right at the table, in front of everyone, "Well, it's good Chloe doesn't have much else going on, so she can be there for Mom." I smiled. I said nothing. That's what I did back then. Tyler laughed. Brittany didn't even look up from her phone. My grandmother put her fork down. Slow, deliberate, the way she did everything by then. Diane. That's an ugly thing to say about someone who drives 2 hours every weekend to help me shower. Nobody said anything for a long moment. Diane's face went red, and that was the first time I understood, really understood, that my grandmother saw everything. Who showed up, who didn't. She'd been keeping a record this whole time, and none of us knew it yet. There were other moments like that, scattered through the years. A missed Christmas because Tyler had work. He didn't. A birthday Diane forgot the same week she posted a dozen photos from a spa weekend in Sedona. A Mother's Day where Brittany sent flowers but couldn't be bothered to drive them over herself, so they sat wilting on the porch 2 days because my grandmother couldn't carry them in alone. I picked them up off that porch, stood there holding a bouquet my cousin paid for and couldn't be bothered to deliver, and felt something shift in me. Not anger yet, just a tired, quiet kind of clarity, like a window fogging clear, and I kept showing up anyway. Not because I was a saint, because I loved her. Those weekends, even the hard ones, were some of the best of my life. We'd sit on the dock at dusk, her wrapped in a blanket even in July, because the stroke had made her run cold, and she'd tell me about my grandfather, about my mom as a little girl, about a version of this family that existed before the resentment hardened into something permanent. "This house has good bones," she told me once. "Bones remember things." She patted the railing like it was a shoulder. "I want it to remember you in it." I let that comment go right past me. I shouldn't have. About a year after the first stroke, she asked me to drive her into town for boring paperwork stuff. I figured it was the will, or maybe her medical directives. Her doctor had been after her about that. We went to a small office above a pharmacy. Hayes and Associates. Robert Hayes had handled my grandfather's affairs decades back and kept doing the same for Eleanor. I sat in the waiting room 40 minutes while she went in alone. When she came out, she looked lighter, like she'd set something down. What was that about? Just getting my affairs in order. Things I should have done years ago. "Everything okay?" "Everything's fine, sweetheart." She patted my hand. "Don't worry about old lady business." Then she asked if I wanted ice cream on the way home, and because I was 23 and tired in the bone-deep way you get after a year of weekend drives, I let it go. I think about that drive a lot now, how close I came to never knowing what happened in that office. Her health held for 4 more years. Small scares, nothing major. She was tough in a way that skipped a generation and landed entirely in me, somehow. The real decline started March. I turned 28. A second stroke, worse than the first. She lost most of the use of her left side. Her speech turned slow and effortful, like she was pushing words uphill. The doctors said months, not years. I took a leave of absence. Cost me a promotion I'd been working toward for over a year. I didn't care. I moved into her guest room for what turned out to be the last 11 weeks of her life. Diane visited twice in those 11 weeks. Brittany came once with her kids for about 40 minutes, mostly because her oldest needed a bathroom break on a road trip, and the timing happened to line up. Tyler texted, "Thinking of Grandma, let me know if you need anything." That was the whole of it. Aunt Carol flew in from Colorado and stayed 2 weeks. I don't know if I'd have survived those weeks without her. We split overnight shifts, learned the hospice equipment together, sat through nights where her breathing turned ragged, and we didn't know if morning was coming. In her clearer hours, she'd talk. Not always coherent, the stroke had taken pieces of her language and hidden them somewhere she couldn't reach, but sometimes she was completely there. One afternoon in early May, she gripped my hand with whatever strength was left in her right side. "The house, Chloe." Her eyes were wet, urgent. "You know what I did." "I know, Grandma." "Don't worry about that right now. Use it. Don't let it sit empty. Her grip tightened. Bring good people there. Not everyone gets to come back. I thought she was speaking in riddles, the way dying people sometimes do. I held her hand and told her I understood. I genuinely thought I did. She died on a Tuesday morning, late May, just as light was coming up through the bedroom window. Carol and I were both there. Her breathing had slowed the night before into the pattern hospice nurses quietly call the changes. Around 6:40, it just stopped. No struggle, just stillness, settling into the room like dust. I held her hand for almost an hour after. Carol sat behind me, arms around my shoulders, and we cried in a way that felt like the only honest thing happening anywhere in our family that morning. I called Diane around 7:30. She cried on the phone. It sounded real, and said she'd start making calls. I had no idea that by that afternoon, while I sat across from a stranger asking me to choose between wood finishes and lining colors I had no business being asked about, my cousins were already driving north with a plan of their own. The funeral was 4 days later. A blur, flowers, an obituary, deciding who'd speak. The reception was supposed to be at the lake house, like it always was. Diane had moved it to her own place a week earlier, said the lake house wasn't set up for a crowd that size. I didn't push. I was too far underwater to ask why. I was a pallbearer, alongside my dad, James, Tyler, two of my grandfather's old friends. I remember the weight of the casket settling into my shoulder. The strange, numb feeling of walking down the aisle of the church I'd been baptized in. At the reception, I noticed Tyler and Brittany glued to their phones. I figured condolence texts, logistics. I was wrong. Around 4, my cousin James, Carol's son, the one I'd always been closest to, pulled me into a corner of Diane's kitchen. His face was wrong. Tight. Chloe, I need to show you something. You're not gonna like it. He turned his phone around. Brittany's story posted 40 minutes earlier. The dock, gold light on the water, her and Tyler with their feet in the lake and wine in their hands. Finally home. New chapter starts here. I stared at it longer than made sense. Not because I didn't understand it, because some part of my brain was refusing to let it in. We'd buried her 4 hours earlier. The dirt on her grave hadn't even settled yet. What does finally home mean? My voice came out strange. Not mine. I don't know. James's jaw was tight. Tyre posted something too. A locksmith, drilling into the front door. Out with the old. The floor tilted a little under me. I found Diane in the living room, accepting condolences from a neighbor, her face arranged into careful grief. I asked her, hand shaking, voice somehow steady, what Brittany and Tyler were doing at the lake house. Something flickered across her face. Just a flash. Then it smoothed back into something practiced. Oh, honey, I should have told you earlier. I just didn't want to add to your stress, of all days. A pause, like she was choosing words off a shelf. Mom and I talked about this before she got sick. The house is going to the kids, Brittany and Tyler. Made the most sense, since they're the ones who'll actually use it with the grandkids and everything. You're so busy with your career, sweetheart. We didn't think you'd even want the upkeep. I want you to sit with that sentence for a second, because I did. The same woman who, years earlier, told a table full of people I didn't have much else going on, was now telling me I was too busy to want my own grandmother's house. The story bends to whatever's useful that day. She never told me that. It was a private conversation, sweetheart. On the day we buried her, you let them change the locks? Diane's face hardened. The mask slipped a little further. Chloe, this isn't the time. People are grieving. I'm not arguing about a house right now. I left 20 minutes later. I couldn't be in that house, surrounded by people who'd known and said nothing, while I'd spent a week numb, planning a funeral for the one person who'd ever actually shown up for me. I sat in my car in Diane's driveway for almost 10 minutes before I could make myself drive. And then, instead of going home, I drove north, toward the only place that felt like it still had her in it. I know what some of you are thinking. Why didn't I just call a lawyer right then? Honest answer, grief doesn't make you logical. I was thinking about dead flowers on a porch, about casseroles that stopped after 3 weeks, About every quiet year, I absorbed the unfairness because I believed stubbornly that love wasn't supposed to come with a ledger attached. I was wrong about a lot that day. I wasn't wrong to be angry. It took an hour and 40 minutes to get there, still in my black dress, my makeup long cried off, hands gripping the wheel hard enough to whiten my knuckles. The sun was low over the water by the time I pulled into the gravel drive. That golden light that looks beautiful and feels cruel, depending on the day. Brittany and Tyler were still on the dock. Brittany's husband, Mark, a cooler of beer between them. A brand new lockbox bolted to the door frame. My code wasn't on it. Tyler saw me first. His face went from surprise to something closer to irritation. Chloe, hey. Like I'd shown up uninvited to his place. Didn't expect you out here. You drilled out the locks the day we buried her. Brittany stood, brushing sand off her dress. Look, I know the timing's bad, but Mom said it was fine. She said you guys talked it through. She did not say that to me. Maybe Grandma changed her mind and didn't mention it. Tyler's voice had that explaining to a child tone. Look, nobody's pushing you out. You can still come visit. We just figured somebody's got to actually own it. Make the decisions. Pay the taxes. I've paid half the upkeep on this house for 3 years. New dock boards. The roof after the storm. I drove up here every other weekend for 5 years while you two visited twice a year combined. Something flickered across Brittany's face. Guilt, maybe. Tyler just shrugged. That's not really our problem, is it? You did that 'cause you wanted to. Nobody made you. I stood there on the gravel in my funeral dress, watching them drink beer on a dock that smelled like my whole childhood, and felt something in me go very still. I'm going to look into this, properly. With a lawyer. Tyler laughed, an ugly, short bark of a sound I will hear in my sleep for the rest of my life. Go for it. It's already done. Locks are changed. Mom's the executor. Nothing to look into. I didn't say anything else. I got in my car. Halfway home, the numbness cracked, and I had to pull onto the shoulder for 20 minutes before I could see well enough to drive. That was one of the lowest nights of my life. 4 days, a grandmother in the ground, mocked on a dock by people who'd treated her like an afterthought for years. And underneath all of it, a small, ugly voice whispering that maybe they were right, that wanting to take care of her meant I wasn't owed anything back. I want to tell you that voice is a lie. It took me a while to believe it myself. As it turns out, someone had already protected me from that lie, 5 years earlier, in a law office above a pharmacy, while I sat in the waiting room with absolutely no idea. That Monday, still raw, barely sleeping, I called Robert Hayes. Told him everything, the locks, Diane's claim, Tyler's certainty there was nothing to look into. Said I just wanted to know what the will actually said, even if it was bad news. There was a pause on the line. Chloe, I think you'd better come in. There's something about the lake house you need to see. It's not in the will at all. I drove to Maple Ridge that afternoon, heart going the whole way. Robert Hayes, soft-spoken, 60s, reading glasses pushed down his nose, pulled a folder out of a cabinet behind his desk. 5 years ago, your grandmother came to me and asked me to draft a quitclaim deed, transferring the Pine Hollow property out of her name and into yours. He set the folder down between us. She was completely lucid. This was well before her decline. And I have documentation, including a notarized capacity assessment, because she specifically asked for one. She knew her family might question it someday. The deed was signed, notarized, and recorded with the county clerk that same month. I just stared at him. I don't understand. She never told me. She told me she didn't want you to feel pressured or burdened while she was still living there. He paused. I'm quoting my own notes here. She said she wanted you to inherit it like a gift, not a fight. He slid the folder the rest of the way across. Legally speaking, Chloe, you've owned that lake house for 5 years. Your cousins didn't inherit anything because there was nothing left for your grandmother to leave. This isn't probate. It's public record. I sat there a long time just looking at it. My name, typed in black ink, dated 5 years back. Her signature underneath. That careful looping handwriting I'd know anywhere. The ice cream on the way home. Don't worry about old lady business. her hand gripping mine on her deathbed. The house, Chloe. You know what I did. She hadn't been speaking in riddles at all. Nobody had thought to check the county records. Not Diane, not Brittany, not Tyler. They figured because I was quiet, I just wouldn't. They figured wrong. I didn't go scorched earth right away. Some part of me still hoped this could end without a war. For about 48 hours, I actually believed that if I just showed Diane the deed, she'd tell her kids to hand back the keys. I called her that Tuesday night, explained it as calm as I could manage. That's not possible, she said flat. Mom would have told me. I was her power of attorney, Chloe. She told me everything. She told her lawyer. And had it notarized with a capacity assessment, specifically because she expected this. A long silence. Then her voice went cold in a way I'd never heard from her. You manipulated her. Up there every weekend, alone with her, for years. Of course she signed whatever you put in front of her. That landed somewhere deep in my chest. A betrayal stacked on a betrayal. I didn't even know about the deed until yesterday, Diane. I drove her to the appointment and sat in the lobby. Sure, she said. We'll see what a judge thinks about that. She hung up. I sat there holding the phone, stunned at how fast she'd gone from grieving daughter to threatening her own niece over a house that was never legally hers to give away. The next morning, I called Robert Hayes back and asked plainly, if they won't leave, what are my options? 2 paths, he said. Formal eviction, which can take weeks. Or, since this is criminal trespassing on a property you demonstrably own, you call the sheriff directly. Bring the deed, bring my number, request a civil standby. Deputies escort you to the property. If they refuse to leave something they have no legal claim to, the deputies have grounds to remove them. I sat with that for 2 more days. Some part of me, the part that spent 5 years being quiet, absorbing things without complaint, flinched at the idea of calling law enforcement on my own blood. But I kept coming back to Tyler's laugh on that dock. Go for it. It's already done, it wasn't done. Not even close. I called the Clearwater County non-emergency line on a Thursday, 2.5 weeks after the funeral. Requested a civil standby for that Saturday morning. Brittany had posted online that she and Tyler would both be there for what she called opening weekend. Saturday, I drove out with Robert Hayes, following in his own car, the deed and a certified copy in a folder on my passenger seat. My hands shook the whole drive. Not fear, exactly. Just the weight of what I was about to do. 2 sheriff's vehicles were already parked at the end of the gravel when we got there, around 9:30. Sergeant Donnelly and a younger deputy named Briggs stood near the porch. Brittany opened the door in pajama pants, coffee mug in hand, her face sliding from confusion to alarm. What's going on? Ma'am, Sergeant Donnelly, Clearwater County. We're here for a civil standby. She nodded toward me. This woman has documentation showing she's the legal owner of this property. Tyler came up behind her, shirtless, clearly just woken up. This is insane. This is our family's house. You can't show up with cops because you're mad about a will. It's not about the will, Robert Hayes said, holding out the certified copy. This property was transferred via quitclaim deed 5 years ago, recorded with the county. Your grandmother hasn't owned it since. I watched Tyler's eyes move across the page. The date. The notary seal, the signature, something cracked in his face, not remorse, exactly. More like the specific panic of realizing the ground under you's been gone a long time and you never bothered checking. This isn't real. But his voice had already lost its certainty. It's recorded with the county, sir, Donnelly said. Verify it yourself Monday. Right now, Ms. Vance has provided sufficient documentation of ownership, and you don't have her permission to be here. You've got an hour to gather your things. Brittany started crying, the first real emotion I'd seen from either of them since the funeral. I'm not going to pretend it moved me the way it might have a month earlier. I'd cried in front of them once, raw and exposed, and they'd posted a celebration 4 hours later. I didn't have sympathy left to spend. You're really doing this. Her voice cracked. On Grandma's house, right after she died. You changed the locks on a house I legally own. The day we buried her. I kept my voice level, somehow. I didn't decide I'd go this way, Brittany. I just decided I wouldn't let it stand. The hour was tense. Slammed cabinets, muttered complaints, Tyler on the phone with someone, probably Diane, who showed up 45 minutes too late to change anything. Mark mostly stayed quiet, loading the car like a man who'd told his wife this whole plan was a bad idea from day one. By the time Diane arrived, breathless, car door still swinging behind her, the cars were already packed. The lockbox was off the frame. Donnelly stood on the porch with a clipboard. "Chloe, please." Diane's composure from the funeral was gone, replaced by something raw. "This is family. We can figure this out. You had 3 weeks to figure it out. I called you the day I found out, told you what the lawyer said. You told me you'd see what a judge thinks. I didn't think you'd actually." That's the problem. Something settled in my chest as I said it, something that had been loose for 5 years. Nobody in this family ever thought I'd actually do anything, so nobody bothered checking the county records before they changed the locks. You didn't think I was worth checking on. I walked past her, up the porch steps, into the house that still smelled like cedar and lake water and every good memory I had left of her. I stood in the living room while my cousins finished loading the car behind me. They drove off around 10:45. A cousin who still talks to me later told me Brittany and Tyler ended up sleeping in their car that night. Every motel in town booked solid for a wedding. There's a small, petty part of me that found that satisfying. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. The weeks after weren't neat. It felt like watching a family that had probably been broken for a long time finally finish coming apart. Diane didn't speak to me for almost 2 months. When she finally texted, it wasn't an apology. It was a long, carefully worded message about how I'd torn the family apart over a piece of property, conveniently leaving out the part where her kids broke into a house that wasn't theirs on the day of their grandmother's funeral. I didn't respond. Some bridges you don't have to burn. You just stop crossing them. Tyler tried briefly to contest the deed, undue influence, some lawyer's phrase echoing Diane's accusation that I'd manipulated her. Robert Hayes wasn't worried. The notarized capacity assessment made it close to impossible. Tyler dropped it quietly. I haven't heard from him since. Brittany, of all people, reached out about 4 months later with something close to reflection. Not quite an apology. She said she'd been thinking about how that day must have looked from where I was standing, even if she still believed the original plan came from wanting to keep the house in the family that actually used it. We're not close. I don't think we ever will be. But we're not enemies either, and I've learned not every relationship needs to be fully mended or fully cut. Aunt Carol was the one who mattered most through all of it. When I told her about the deed, the standby, she didn't hesitate. She saw exactly who you were. Her voice went thick on the phone. She saw all of us, honestly. I just wish she hadn't had to be so quiet about protecting you. I don't think she had a choice, I said, not with how Diane's side operates. Carol was quiet a second. No, I suppose she didn't. It took about 6 months before I felt ready to do anything with the house beyond just using it the way I always had. Driving up most weekends, sitting on the dock at dusk, feeling her in every creaky stair and worn handle. Around the 1-year mark, sitting on that same dock where Tyler once laughed at me with a beer in his hand, I kept coming back to what she'd said near the end. Bring good people there. Not everyone gets to come back. I'd always assumed she meant family. I started wondering if she meant something bigger. I called Carol first. Then a small handful of women, friends, a co-worker going through a brutal divorce, a cousin on my dad's side I'd reconnected with, and asked if they wanted a weekend at the lake house. No agenda. Just somewhere quiet to exist without owing anyone anything. That first weekend turned into something I hadn't planned for. Watching women who'd never met before sit on that dock, the same one where she once told me about bones that remember, talking openly about grief, about burnout, about the particular exhaustion of always being the one everyone leans on and nobody checks in on. Something clicked into place. I started calling it the Eleanor Project, informally at first. Registered it as a nonprofit 8 months later. The house hosts free retreat weekends now for women who've spent years as the responsible one. The caregiver, the one everyone assumes is fine because she never says otherwise. Carol comes up nearly every weekend. So does my Aunt Patricia, my father's sister, who I've grown closer to since my mom died and who'd always quietly admired how I handled my grandmother's care. We held the first official retreat exactly a year, and 3 days after the morning, my cousins lost their locks. I stood on that dock and watched 6 women I'd barely known a year earlier laughing over coffee. And I thought about her, wrapped in a blanket in July, telling me the house had good bones and she wanted it to remember me in it. I think it does now. I think it remembers all of us. I think about that day in Robert Hayes's office more than almost anything. The moment he slid that folder across the desk and I understood she'd protected me 5 years before I even knew I needed it. She could have told everyone, let Diane argue and negotiate and probably talk her out of it eventually. Instead, she did it quietly. Let the paperwork speak for her in a language nobody could twist once she was gone. If you've ever been the one who quietly absorbs the unfairness, the one who gets called too busy, or the quiet one, whichever's convenient that week, I'm not going to tell you it always works out the way it worked out for me. I got lucky in a way most people don't. But showing up still mattered, even before I knew anyone was counting it. The lake house still smells like cedar and lake water in the mornings. That soft board near the third post is still soft. I've never replaced it. I like the way it creaks under my feet, same as it did when I was 16, crying into her shoulder for 3 days while she told me I didn't have to be okay yet, that the rest would come later. She was right. It came later. It just came with a deed, a sheriff's deputy, and a phone call I almost didn't have the courage to make. If you've ever found something out about someone after they were already gone, something that changed the whole shape of how you understood them, I'd actually like to know. Tell me in the comments. I read all of them, and this last year, hearing how other people got through their own versions of this has helped more than I expected it to. Thanks for listening to mine.